The first recording was only 12 seconds long. I almost deleted it. It appeared quietly, without any notification, while I was clearing storage on my phone. A small audio file, unnamed, sitting between older voice notes I actually remembered recording. There was no date I recognized, no title, just a timestamp. 12:04 a.m. I frowned slightly. Because I don't record things at midnight, not intentionally, I tapped it. The interface opened. Plain, minimal, a single play button, duration 0012. I hesitated. Not because I expected something strange, because I didn't remember creating it. Then I pressed play. At first, nothing. No background noise, no static, just silence. Then a sound, soft, close. Fabric shifting, like someone adjusting their position. Then my voice, calm, measured. I shouldn't have said that. The recording ended. I didn't move, not immediately. Because the sentence didn't belong to anything I remembered. Not a conversation, not a thought, not a moment. I replayed it. Same result, same silence, same voice, same words. I shouldn't have said that. I leaned back slightly in my chair, because now the question wasn't what it said. It was when it had been recorded. I checked the details. The file had a timestamp. Created 12:04 a.m. Last night, I looked at the time. 6:18 p.m., then back at the file, because I knew where I had been at midnight. At home, asleep, no calls, no messages, no reason to record anything. I opened my call log. Nothing, my messages, nothing unusual. I checked my voice memo app. This file wasn't even listed there. It existed only in storage, as if it had been placed there. Not created through the normal process. I felt something settle inside me, because that meant one thing. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't organize themselves outside of systems. They don't bypass structure. They don't appear clean, controlled, intentional. I closed the file, went back to the list, and that's when I saw it. Another one right below, same format, no title. No icon, just a timestamp. 12:17 a.m., duration 0021. I stared at it, because now there was a pattern, not one recording. 2, 17 minutes apart. I tapped it, opened it, and pressed play. The same silence, the same absence of background, then my voice, slightly different this time, more focused, more direct. You said you wouldn't open the door. I froze. Because that sentence connected to something, not from the recording, from memory, from earlier, from the neighbor. You said if I opened the door, it wouldn't be you anymore. I lowered the phone slowly, because now this wasn't just a random file. It was referencing something, something I had heard. Something I had experienced, but not at midnight, not while recording. I replayed the second file, listening carefully. The tone, the pacing, the delivery, it was me, not similar, not approximate. Exact, but the intent didn't feel like mine. I closed it, went back again, scrolled, and found a third. 12:31 a.m. Duration 0009. I didn't hesitate this time. I pressed play immediately. Silence. Then my voice, short, clear. They're starting to notice. The recording ended. I felt something shift, because now this wasn't random speech. It wasn't isolated. It was continuous, a sequence. 3 recordings, 12 minutes, 17 minutes, 14 minutes, each one adding something, each one building on something else. I leaned forward slightly. Because now the question wasn't whether I recorded them, it was something else. What conversation were these part of? I checked the timestamps again. 12:04, 12:17, 12:31, late, precise, consistent. I opened my calendar, checked last night. Nothing scheduled, no events, no calls, no reminders, just empty space. And yet something had been recorded, 3 times, at specific intervals. I went back to storage, scrolled further, looking for more, and then I saw it, not one more, several. 12:46 a.m., 1:02 a.m., 1:19 a.m., each one slightly longer, each one unnamed. Each one placed exactly where it didn't belong. I didn't open them yet, I just stared. Because now the pattern extended beyond 3. It had continued, for over an hour, while I was asleep. Or at least while I believed I was. I looked at the first file again. I shouldn't have said that. Then the second. You said you wouldn't open the door. Then the third. They're starting to notice. I exhaled slowly, because those weren't random thoughts. They were responses to something else, to someone else. A conversation that I didn't remember having. I picked up the phone again, my grip slightly tighter now because there was only one way to understand. I opened the fourth recording. 12:46 a.m., pressed play, and waited. Because now, whatever was on the other side of these recordings was about to continue, and I needed to hear what I had said next. The fourth recording was longer. I could tell before I even pressed play. 0037, long enough to be more than a sentence, long enough to be part of something. I tapped it. The screen opened, same interface, same silence. Then a breath, closer this time, more present, and then my voice, lower, more controlled. They're tracking patterns now. A pause, not empty, listening, then again. Not just movement, speech. I felt something tighten in my chest, because that wasn't how I talk, not in casual conversation, not even when I'm thinking out loud. It sounded like I was explaining something structured, something technical. I replayed it, carefully, listening to the pauses, because they weren't random, they were responses. Gaps where something else should have been, another voice, another question, something I wasn't hearing. I closed the file, opened the next one, 1:02 a.m., duration 0052, longer, more complete. I pressed play, the same silence, then my voice again, faster this time, more urgent. You can't keep using the same sequence. A pause, then they'll flag it. Another pause, shorter. Then, no, listen, the recording cut. Abrupt, incomplete, as if it had been stopped. Not ended. I leaned back slowly, because now this wasn't just a monologue, it was dialogue. Half of it missing, the other half still there, recorded, stored. I opened the next file. 1:19 a.m., duration 01:11. I hesitated, not because I was unsure, because I already knew what I would hear. My voice, responding, explaining, continuing something I had no memory of. I pressed play, silence. Then my voice, quieter, more focused. I told you it's not about avoiding detection anymore. A longer pause. Then, it's about who gets replaced first. The words settled, heavy, because that wasn't just conversation. That was intent, that was planning, that was decision. I stopped the recording, didn't replay it because I didn't need to, I had heard enough. I looked at the list again. More files, after 1:19. 1:33 a.m., 1:48 a.m., 2:03 a.m. The sequence continued, over and over, intervals precise, consistent. I picked up the phone, held it in both hands now. Because something about this was no longer passive. It wasn't just something that had happened. It was something ongoing, something structured. Something that had continued while I believed I was asleep. I opened the 1:33 file. Duration 0044, pressed play, my voice again, this time slower, measured. They're still following the door pattern. A pause, then, same time, same knock. I froze because that connected directly, not just to the recordings, to the neighbor, to the door. To 11:42 p.m., I replayed it because now the connection wasn't subtle, it was direct. They're still following the door pattern. There, plural, not me, not him, something else. I opened the next file, 1:48 a.m., duration 0106, pressed play, my voice, softer now, lower. They don't know it's already split. A pause, then, not completely. I felt something shift inside me. Because that sentence didn't belong to anything I understood. Split, not completely. That meant there were two states, two versions, two positions. I closed the file, looked at the list again. Because now the pattern wasn't just time. It was escalation. Each recording revealing more, each one building on the last, until it reached something I hadn't heard yet. I opened the next one. 2:03 a.m. Duration 0128. The longest so far. I didn't hesitate. I pressed play. The silence was different now, not empty, full, as if the absence of sound carried something. Then my voice clear. Focused, almost calm. If they realize both versions are active at the same time, a pause, longer, then, they won't know which one to remove. The recording ended. I didn't move. Because now everything connected. The neighbor, the door, the sequence, the recordings, the pattern, everything pointed to the same structure. Two versions, one inside, one outside, one observed. One acting, and something watching both. I looked at the phone again, at the list of recordings, at the timestamps, because now the question wasn't what I had said, it was something else. Who was I talking to? I didn't open the next file right away, because whatever was coming next wasn't just more information, it was direction. Everything so far had been leading somewhere. Not random fragments, not disconnected sentences, a structure, a conversation with purpose, and I had only heard half of it. I looked at the list again. The next timestamp, 2:17 a.m., duration 0039. Shorter, more contained, like a response. I tapped it, pressed play, silence. Then my voice, lower than before, controlled. They're still using me to verify continuity. I frowned slightly. Because that wasn't just observation, that was involvement, a role, assigned. I replayed it because now the wording mattered. Using me, not watching, not following, using. I closed it. Open the next one, 2:31 a.m., duration 0058, pressed play, my voice again, faster this time, more pressured. If you don't stop repeating the sequence, they'll collapse both instances. A pause. Then, do you understand that? The recording cut. I felt something tighten. Because that sentence had weight, collapse, instances, plural, not abstract, not metaphor, defined, structured. Two instances, two versions, and both at risk. I opened the next file, 2:46 a.m., duration 0112, pressed play, silence. Then my voice, more urgent now, more direct. You're not listening. A pause, then, this only works if one of us stays unconfirmed. I froze, because that was the first rule, clear, precise, unavoidable, one must remain unconfirmed. Which meant the moment both were confirmed, the system would resolve it. Remove one or both. I closed the file slowly, because now the conversation had shifted. It wasn't just explanation anymore. It was negotiation, between two sides, two versions, two me. I looked at the list again, because now the next recording mattered more than all the others. 2:59 a.m. Duration 0147, the longest so far. I tapped it, pressed play, and listened. My voice came immediately. No silence this time, no delay, just urgency. Stop trying to match me. A pause. Then that's how they track us. Another pause, shorter. Then you need to stay out of alignment. I exhaled slowly, because that connected directly, not just to the recordings. To what I had done earlier, standing still, breaking the pattern, interrupting alignment. I listened again, because now every word mattered. You need to stay out of alignment, not avoid. Not hide, just not match. I closed the file, because I already understood something critical. Whatever version of me had recorded this had figured it out, the rules, the system. The way it operated, and more importantly, the way to survive it. I looked at the phone again, at the remaining files, because there were still more. After 2:59, 3:13 a.m., 3:28 a.m., 3:44 a.m. The sequence continued. Longer, deeper, more detailed. I picked up the phone again. Opened the 3:13 file. Duration 0204, pressed play, my voice. Calmer now, more focused. They're not observing us directly anymore. A pause, then they're observing the difference. I leaned forward slightly, because that was new, not presence, not action, difference. The gap between versions, the space where alignment fails, that's where the system looked. I replayed it, carefully. They're observing the difference. That meant matching was dangerous. But so was complete separation. The system needed a measurable gap, something it could track, something it could evaluate. I opened the next file. 3:28 a.m., duration 0219, pressed play. My voice again, lower, more deliberate. If the difference becomes too stable, a pause, then they'll define it as the primary instance. I felt something shift. Because that meant stability mattered. Not just existence, not just presence. The version that remained consistent would be chosen. I closed the file slowly. Because now the structure was almost complete. I opened the final one. 3:44 a.m., Duration 02:52. The longest of all, I didn't hesitate, I pressed play. My voice came through, clear, precise, final. This is the last time we can talk like this. A pause, long, then they're closing the gap. Another pause, then you need to remember this when you wake up. Silence. Then don't follow the pattern. A breath, soft, controlled, and the final sentence. Because if you do, a pause, then you won't be the one who stays. The recording ended. I didn't move. Because now everything was clear. Not the situation. The rule, don't follow the pattern, stay out of alignment, remain unconfirmed, create difference. Because that was the only way to avoid being replaced. I looked at the time. 6:52 p.m., then back at the recordings, because now there was only one thing left to determine. Tonight at 11:42 p.m., which version would follow the pattern? I didn't listen to the recordings again. Not yet, because repeating them might become a pattern. And now I understood something clearly. Patterns were dangerous, not just behavior, repetition, recognition, anything that could be tracked. I placed the phone face down on the table, then sat still. Completely still, because now even small movements mattered. The way I breathed, the way I shifted in my chair, the way I looked around the room, everything could become something the system used. I looked at the clock. 7:01 p.m. Still hours before 11:42, still time to understand, still time to prepare. But preparation could also become a pattern, so I did nothing. I stayed where I was. No television, no sound, no distraction, just awareness. The apartment felt different now, not physically, structurally, as if it was part of something larger, something observing, not me directly. The difference, the variation, the deviation from expectation. I leaned slightly forward, then stopped, because that movement was intentional, and intentional movement could be measured. I relaxed again, letting everything return to neutral. No structure, no repetition, no pattern. Time passed. Slowly. 7:18 p.m., then 7:36, then 8:02. Nothing unusual happened, no new recordings. No notifications, no changes, and that felt wrong. Because if something was observing, then something should be reacting, unless this part didn't require reaction. Unless this part was just waiting, I picked up the phone again, carefully, not repeating the exact movement from before, different angle, different timing, because now even that mattered. I opened the recordings again, scrolled slowly, not at a constant speed, not at a consistent rhythm, because consistency was alignment, and alignment was what I needed to avoid. I stopped at the final file again. 3:44 a.m. I didn't press play, I already knew what it said. Don't follow the pattern. Instead, I opened the file details, looking for something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. Metadata, location, anything, but there was nothing. No coordinates, no source, no device reference, just a timestamp. Clean, isolated, intentional. I closed it. Then did something different. I created a new recording, not through the voice app, through a third-party tool, something separate, something the system might not recognize. I pressed record. Waited a second, then spoke, quietly. This is me. I stopped the recording, saved it, then played it back. My voice, normal, recognizable, but different, different from the ones in the files. Less controlled, less precise, less structured. I compared them, back and forth, my new recording, then the ones from last night, and the difference was clear. The ones from last night were too clean, too measured, too exact, as if every word had been placed. Not spoken. I leaned back slowly, because now the difference wasn't just in memory. It was in form. The version of me in those recordings was optimized, aligned, consistent, and that made it easier to track, easier to match, easier to replace. I looked at the clock again. 8:27 p.m., then back at the phone, because now the question wasn't what would happen at 11:42, it was something else. Which version of me would be closer to that pattern? I stood up slowly. Walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the door, looked at it, not touching, not approaching, just observing, because that door was the center of the sequence. The point where everything repeated, the point where alignment occurred, And tonight, it would happen again. I stepped back, because getting too close might trigger something. Might create a pattern, might align me with the version outside. I returned to the living room, sat down again, and did nothing, no movement, no repetition, no expectation. Because now the only way to stay unconfirmed was to remain unpredictable. Time passed, 9:03 p.m., then 9:41, then 10:12. The apartment stayed silent, unchanged, until the phone vibrated. I froze. Because that hadn't happened all evening, I looked down, a new file. Timestamp 10:11 p.m., duration 0005. I didn't touch it immediately, because that shouldn't exist, not without recording. Not without action. And yet it was there. I tapped it, pressed play, my voice, short, direct. It's starting early. The recording ended. I felt something settle inside me. Because now the sequence wasn't waiting for 11:42. It was advancing, adapting. And that meant one thing. The other version was already active. I didn't play it again. Not immediately. Because those 4 words were enough. It's starting early. That wasn't observation. That was warning. And it had been recorded at 10:11, less than a minute before I saw it. Which meant the other version wasn't just active. It was ahead. I looked at the clock. 10:14 p.m., then back at the phone, because now the timeline had shifted. The sequence wasn't fixed at 11:42 anymore. It was adjusting, moving earlier, closing the gap, just like the last recording had said. They're closing the gap. I stood up slowly. Walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the door. Listened, nothing, no knock, no footsteps, no voice, and yet something felt different. Not outside, inside. The air felt tighter, more defined. As if the space itself had been structured. Prepared, I stepped back, because now the boundary wasn't just the door, it was the apartment. The whole space had become part of the sequence. I returned to the living room, picked up the phone, opened the list again. The new file was still there. 10:11 p.m., duration 0005. I checked the time again. 10:15 p.m., then the phone vibrated. Another file appeared. Timestamp 10:15 p.m., duration 0008. I didn't hesitate this time. I pressed play, my voice, sharper now, more urgent. You're too consistent. The recording ended. I exhaled slowly, because that was directed at me, not the system, not the other version, me. I looked around the room. Because now, everything I had done tonight, everything I thought was unpredictable, might not have been enough. I sat, I stayed still, I avoided repetition. But maybe that had become a pattern too. I looked at my hands, then at the table, then at the phone, because consistency doesn't mean repetition, it means stability. And stability is something that can be measured. I stood up again, then immediately sat down, then stood again, then walked to the window, then stopped halfway, changed direction. Moved without rhythm, without structure, without intention, because now breaking the pattern wasn't enough. I had to break consistency itself. The phone vibrated again. Another file. 10:18 p.m. Duration 0011. I played it, my voice, lower, more controlled. That helps. A pause, then, but not for long. I felt something settle, because that confirmed it. The other version was guiding me, not just recording, not just warning, adjusting, helping me stay unconfirmed. I looked at the time again. 10:19 p.m., then back at the phone. Because now the sequence was accelerating. Files appearing closer together, responses faster, the gap closing. I walked to the hallway again, stopped, listened, still nothing. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It felt occupied, like something was already there, waiting, not outside, inside the structure, inside the sequence. I stepped back. Because now it wasn't about avoiding the door. It was about avoiding alignment. Anywhere. I turned away, walked back into the living room, but didn't sit this time. I stayed standing, then moved. Randomly, without pattern, without rhythm, without pause, because now stillness could be consistency. Movement could be consistency. Anything repeated could be tracked. The phone vibrated again. 10:22 p.m. Another file. Duration 0014. I pressed play, my voice, softer now, almost calm. They're narrowing it. A pause, then you don't have much time. I felt something shift. Because that meant the system was approaching resolution. Not later. Soon. I looked at the clock. 10:23 p.m., then back at the phone. Because now the sequence wasn't heading toward 11:42. It was collapsing inward, toward now. I walked to the door again, this time closer, close enough to touch it, but I didn't, because touching it could be a trigger, could be confirmation. Could be alignment. I stepped back, then forward, then back again. No pattern, no repetition, just movement. The phone vibrated again. 10:26 p.m., another file. Duration 0009. I played it, my voice. Quiet, focused. They're about to decide. The recording ended. I stood still, not by choice, because now there was nothing left to test, nothing left to adjust. The system had gathered enough. Measured enough, compared enough. The difference between me and the other version was already defined. I looked at the door, then at the phone, then back at the door. Because now there was only one question left. When they decide which version will remain, I stopped trying to control it, not because I didn't care anymore. Because I understood something I hadn't before. Every attempt to interfere was still input, still data, still something the system could measure. Even randomness becomes a pattern if it's sustained, so I stopped. Not completely still, not deliberately moving, just neutral, unfocused, unstructured. I let my posture settle naturally. Let my breathing return to something I didn't think about. Because the moment I thought about it, it became intentional. And intention could be tracked. I stood in the middle of the room. Not near the door, not near the window, not anywhere specific, because position itself could be measured. The phone stayed in my hand. Screen dimmed now, no new file, no vibration, nothing. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't waiting, it was evaluating. I looked at the clock. 10:31 p.m., then away from it, because watching time could be consistency. I turned slightly, then stopped, because even that felt like a choice, and choices were patterns. I let my gaze fall naturally, not focusing, not fixing on anything, just present. Then the phone vibrated. Soft, short. I didn't react immediately, because reacting too fast could be measured. I waited a second, then looked down. Another file. Timestamp 10:32 p.m. Duration 0006. I opened it, pressed play, my voice, calm, controlled. This is the last adjustment. The recording ended. I felt something settle, because that was final, not warning. Not guidance. Conclusion. I looked at the time again. 10:33 p.m., then back at the phone, because now there would be no more corrections, no more help, no more instructions. The system had everything it needed. I stood still, not intentionally, just without input. The room felt heavier, not physically, structurally, like something was aligning, not me, the environment. The space itself, preparing for something. I glanced toward the door, then away, because focusing on it might matter, might count, might align me. I let my attention drift, without control. Without direction, because now the only thing I could do was not be defined. The phone vibrated again. I looked down. No new file, just a screen update. A message, not like the recordings. Not my voice, text, simple, clear. Evaluation in progress. I exhaled slowly, because that was the first direct confirmation. No more hidden structure, no more indirect communication. The system was active. Now I didn't move, I didn't speak, I didn't react, because now everything was being measured. Everything was being compared. Everything was being decided. Time passed. I didn't track it, didn't count it, didn't observe it, because even that could matter. Then the phone vibrated. One final time, I looked down, a new message. Evaluation complete. I felt something settle, not relief, not fear, just finality, because now there was no more process, no more sequence, no more adjustment, only result. I looked at the door. Then at the phone, then back at the door, because now something would change, not gradually, not subtly, instantly, and whatever changed would define which version of me was still here. The room didn't change right away. That was the first thing I noticed. No sound, no movement, no shift in the air. Everything remained exactly as it had been. And yet something had already been decided. I looked down at the phone again. The message was still there. Evaluation complete. No additional line, no explanation, no indication of outcome. Just complete. I stood still, not by choice, because now any movement felt like it came after the decision. Not before. I turned my head slowly, looked around the room, the table, the chair. The window, everything familiar, everything unchanged. And yet something felt different, subtle, indescribable, like the space had shifted slightly, not physically, contextually. I looked at my hands, turned them, flexed my fingers, normal, responsive, still mine. Then the phone vibrated. One last time I looked down. A final line appeared beneath the previous one. Primary instance confirmed. I didn't breathe for a second, because that was the result. Not unresolved, not partial, confirmed. One version had been chosen, the other had not. I exhaled slowly. Then looked toward the door, because now there was only one thing left to understand. Where was the other version? I stepped toward the hallway, not rushed, not hesitant, just moving. Because now there was no reason to avoid alignment. The process was over. The sequence was complete. I reached the door, stopped, looked at the handle, then placed my hand on it, turned it. Opened the door. The hallway was empty, silent, still, exactly as it had been before. I stepped out, looked toward my neighbor's door, closed, no sound, no movement. I walked toward it slowly. Because now I needed to confirm something. Not through the phone, not through recordings, directly. I stopped in front of his door, raised my hand, and knocked. Once, soft, controlled. The same rhythm, the same spacing, the same pattern. I waited. A few seconds, then movement inside, a step, closer. Then his voice, muffled through the door. "You're back." I froze. Because that was the same response. The same recognition, the same assumption. I stepped back slightly. Because now, something didn't match. I hadn't followed the pattern. I hadn't knocked at 11:42. I hadn't repeated the sequence. And yet, he still believed I had. I turned, walked back toward my apartment, entered, closed the door, locked it, then stood there. Because now, the result didn't align with the expectation. The system had confirmed a primary instance, but the pattern was still active. I walked back into the living room, picked up the phone. Looked at the screen. Primary instance confirmed. Still there, unchanged. I scrolled, nothing else, no clarification, no explanation, just that line. I leaned back slowly. Because now there was only one possibility left. The system hadn't chosen between me and the other version. It had chosen something else. I looked at my reflection in the window. Clear, exact. Matching, then I looked away, then back again. Still matching, still correct, still me, and yet the neighbor had said it again. "You're back," as if nothing had changed. As if the pattern had continued, without interruption, without failure, without deviation. I picked up the phone again, looked at the last recording, the one at 10:32 p.m. "This is the last adjustment." Then at the message, "Primary instance confirmed." I felt something settle, cold, precise, because now I understood what had happened. The system hadn't chosen who would stay, it had chosen who would remember. I stood there, silent, still, because now the only difference left between the two versions was awareness. And that meant one thing: the other version was still out there, continuing the sequence, unchanged, unaware, and I was the one who knew. I didn't check the phone again, not immediately. Because I already knew what it would say. Primary instance confirmed. No explanation, no correction, no further instruction. And now I understood why, because nothing else needed to be said. The system had done what it was designed to do. Not eliminate, not replace, select, and then divide. I walked slowly to the window, looked at my reflection. Clear, exact, responsive. Everything where it should be. And yet, that didn't prove anything. Not anymore. Because the other version would look exactly the same, would move the same, would speak the same. Would knock at the same time. The only difference was memory. I stepped back, turned away, walked to the table, picked up the phone, because there was one thing I needed to confirm. Not through the calendar, not through recordings, through silence. I opened the file list again, scrolled to the top, then to the bottom, all the recordings still there, untouched, unchanged. I opened the last one again, 3:44 a.m., pressed play. This is the last time we can talk like this. A pause. They're closing the gap. Another pause. You need to remember this when you wake up. I stopped the playback, because that was the key, not survival, not replacement, memory, one version needed to remember. So the other one could continue. I looked at the clock. 10:41 p.m. Then 10:42. Nothing happened, no knock, no new recording, no vibration. The sequence had shifted again, not gone, not ended. Just moved, I waited. 10:43, 10:44, still nothing. I leaned back slowly. Because now the pattern wasn't tied to time anymore. It was tied to continuity, to the version that continued acting. Without awareness, without interruption, the one that still followed the sequence, I stood up, walked to the hallway, stopped in front of the door, listened, silence. I opened it, looked outside. Empty, closed it again, locked it. Because now that part of the sequence wasn't happening here, not in this version. I walked back into the living room, sat down, placed the phone on the table. And let the silence settle, real silence, not the kind that waits, the kind that remains. Minutes passed, no changes, no sounds, no movement. Then the phone vibrated. I looked down, a new file. Timestamp 10:45 p.m. Duration 0003. I didn't hesitate, I pressed play, my voice short, calm, unaware. I'm here. The recording ended. I didn't move. Because that wasn't me, not this version. Not here, and yet it was happening. The sequence continued, not stopped, not broken, just elsewhere. I placed the phone back down slowly, because now there was nothing left to confirm. Nothing left to interrupt, nothing left to change. The system had resolved itself, exactly as designed. One version to remember, one version to repeat. I leaned back in the chair. Closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them again. The room was still, the door was closed, the phone was silent, everything exactly where it should be, and yet not everything was here. Because somewhere, at some time I couldn't see, the other version of me was already at the door, knocking, waiting, repeating the same sequence, unaware, unchanged, and it would continue. Night after night, without deviation, without memory, without question, while I remained here knowing, listening, and never answering.